My parents sold my son's signed comic collection for $92,000 and used the money to build a gaming room for my brother's kids. When my son saw the empty shelves, he didn't cry. He smiled and said, "Dad, those comics were..." Mom dropped her glass before he finished. My name is Phillip. I am 38 years old. I am a senior financial analyst at a firm in Houston, Texas. I have been there 12 years. I own a townhouse outright. I paid it off ahead of schedule because that is the kind of decision I make when I have a choice, which is to say, I do not carry what I do not have to carry. My son Darius is 16. He takes app classes. On Saturday mornings, he coaches a small group of middle schoolers at his school in what he calls a finance basics club, which he started himself at 14 because he thought it was something they should know. That is the kind of person he is, has been, for as long as I can remember. My wife, Camille, is a graphic designer. We have been married 9 years. She is the kind of person who notices things before I do and says nothing until the right moment. That quality has saved me more than once, and it saved me again this year in ways I will get to. Every year since Darius was 4 years old, we drove up to Memphis for the summer. My parents' house, Bernard and Claudette Okafor. My father is 67. My mother is 63. They have a house in Germantown, 4 bedrooms, a finished basement, a storage room off the back of the garage. That storage room is where Darius kept his collection. He started it when he was 9. First editions, signed issues, key runs from series he had tracked down one issue at a time over multiple years. He was precise about it from the beginning. Mylar bags, acid-free boards, the right humidity. He read about grading scales before he read about much else. By the time he was 13, the collection had grown to the point where his room at home could not hold all of it. So we agreed he would keep the overflow at my parents' house. They had the room. They said they were happy to have it there. My mother said, and I remember the phrasing exactly, she said it would give Darius a reason to keep coming back. I have a cousin named Vince Adeyemi. He is 41, also works in accounting, lives outside Atlanta. He was there the summer Darius started the collection. He watched the thing grow issue by issue across multiple visits over several years. One afternoon, maybe 5 years ago now, he said something to me that I filed away and did not think about again. He said Darius never leaves anything there he actually cares about. I thought Vince meant that Darius was private, that he was the kind of teenager who keeps his real interests separate from family spaces. I did not ask him to explain. I moved on. My brother Terrell is 44. He lives in Cordova, 20 minutes from my parents. He has 2 kids, both in middle school now. His wife Gwen is 40 and works in hospital administration. She has a particular way of going quiet at family events that told me years ago that their marriage was more complicated underneath than it appeared on the surface. Terrell and I get along in the way that brothers who have never been close get along, cordially. We called on birthdays. We showed up to the same tables. I did not know his finances well because I had never asked and he had never volunteered. I would come to understand that was a significant gap in my awareness. My parents have always tilted toward Terrell. I knew that before I could name it. I was 26 when I tried to get my first apartment in Houston. My credit history was thin, which is a polite way of saying I had been responsible, but I had not been building the right kind of record yet. I asked my father to co-sign. He said he could not take on that kind of financial risk. He said it with concern in his voice, the tone of someone who regrets a limitation rather than someone who is making a choice. 2 years later, I found out at Christmas from my aunt that my parents had paid $3,200 out of the family account to rebuild the transmission on Terrell's truck. My father had not mentioned it to me. There was no equivalent concern about risk in that transaction. I noted it. I did not say anything. Every Christmas, Terrell's 2 kids received savings bonds. My parents sat across from Darius every December and handed his cousins paper that would compound in value over time, and they handed my son a gift card to a retailer he did not shop at. I told myself it was not meaningful, that families are complicated, and you cannot audit every gesture. I let it accumulate. 2 summers ago, I was in the kitchen getting water when my mother's voice came through the wall from the living room. She was on the phone with someone. I heard her say, "Darius has so much. He will never miss a few issues." I did not know who she was talking to, and I could not hear the other end, and I told myself she was probably talking about something unrelated. I went back outside. That sentence stayed somewhere in the back of my mind for 2 years, without my registering that it was still there. Darius has always carried a spiral notebook when we visit Memphis. Green cover. Soft from handling. I assumed it was a reading log or a personal journal, the kind of thing a careful kid keeps when he is tracking interests that other people do not share. I never looked inside it. There was no reason to. He never stored anything there that he actually cared about. That is what Vince said. I chose to interpret it narrowly. I did not sit with what it meant. We arrived in Memphis on a Wednesday afternoon this past fall. Camille had a project deadline that pushed our usual summer trip back to November Thanksgiving week. My parents had just had the floors redone. A warm, engineered hardwood that ran through the main level, new kitchen backsplash, pale gray tile. My mother walked us through every room within the first hour of arrival. She was proud of the renovations, and she had reason to be. They were well done. She opened every door. The main bedroom, the back den, the new lighting fixture in the hallway. She did not open the storage room door. It was closed, and she passed it without acknowledgement, and I noticed that, and chose not to ask. She showed us the garage conversion last. Terrell's 2 kids had visited for a weekend 2 months prior, she said, as though this were casual context. They had wanted somewhere to play. She showed us the setup, 3 monitors, a gaming sectional, LED strips along the ceiling, a mini fridge stocked with the drinks her grandchildren preferred. On the wall, centered above the television, in the position where you put something you consider art, was a framed photograph. Studio quality. Terrell's 2 kids, posed, dressed well, the kind of portrait session that runs $400 minimum at a decent studio. It was not a snapshot. Someone had scheduled that appointment. There were no photographs of Darius anywhere in the house. I had not registered this as clearly as I did in that room. Maybe because the room had been built for children who were not him, or maybe because the portrait was exactly the kind of thing you hang when you want to mark who matters. I did not say anything. I looked at the portrait for a moment, and then I looked at the mini fridge, and then I followed my mother back to the kitchen for dinner. That evening was ordinary. My father talked about the yard. My mother served her red rice. Darius ate 2 plates and thanked her. The conversation moved through the normal channels. I watched my mother the way I have always watched her, which is carefully and without appearing to. The next morning, Darius went down to the storage room on his own. I was at the kitchen table with coffee. I heard him open the door. I heard him stand there. Then I heard him walk back out and stand in the hallway. He came to the kitchen doorway. "The shelves are empty," he said. His face was not what I expected. He was not upset. He was not on the edge of anything. He stood there, and something passed across his expression that took me a moment to identify. It was not relief. It was closer to the look of a person who has spent months waiting to find out whether something they already suspected would confirm itself. A hypothesis verified. He smiled. Just slightly. And then he said, "Dad, those comics were." And from the other room came the sound of glass on tile. My mother had dropped her glass before he could finish his sentence. I pulled out my phone. I knew the name of the auction house in the Memphis area that handles estate and specialty collections, because I had looked them up 3 years earlier, when Darius briefly considered selling a duplicate run. I searched their listed lots. I found the transaction in under 20 minutes. The lot was listed as a general comics collection, mixed condition, reader copies and reprints, no key issues specified. Sale price, $982,000. Transaction date, 4 months prior, $982,000. I set my phone face down on the table. Darius was still in the doorway. I said, "Go get your bag. We are going to the hotel." My mother appeared from the kitchen doorway. She said, We should stay for lunch. Her voice was the voice of someone who has thought through how this conversation was going to go and decided in advance how they are going to perform it. I told her we had something we needed to handle. She said, "Is something wrong?" I told her nothing was wrong. We drove to the hotel in silence. Camille sat in the passenger seat and looked at the highway. She had understood the shape of what was happening before I said a single word to her. That is who she is. In the hotel room, Darius unzipped his bag and set the green spiral notebook on the bed. He opened it. "I have kept a log of every issue since I was 12, he said. "Every one. Condition grade estimate, purchase date, provenance notes, series information. I updated it every visit. I looked at the pages, columns, issue numbers, print runs, condition codes, grading estimates, purchase dates and sources going back 4 years. It was not a hobby log. It was a professional grade condition record. The kind of documentation a dealer uses for insurance valuation or estate sale purposes. My son had been maintaining a grading catalog since he was 12 years old without telling me, without asking for help, without any instruction from anyone that I am aware of. He had simply understood that documentation was the thing that made ownership real. I called Vince from the hotel balcony that night. I told him what I had found at the house and what I had found in the lot record. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Darius never left anything there that he actually cared about. You knew that. You chose not to know it." I did not argue. He was right. I had been told something true, and I had classified it as a minor personality observation and moved on. I called Simone Weatherly the next morning. She is a civil litigation attorney in Houston. I had a referral for her from 2 years prior and had never needed to use it. She picked up on the second ring. I told her the situation. She said, "Conversion of a minor's property." "Tell me about documentation." I told her about the auction lot record. I told her about the notebook. She said, "Retain me now. I will call you this afternoon." We retained her before noon. I felt something settle when I hung up. Not relief exactly. More like the specific steadiness of understanding that the next moves belong to someone trained to make them. I want to be honest about what those 5 days between finding the shelves and calling my mother actually felt like. Because the way I am telling this story might suggest I was calm throughout, and that is not accurate. The morning after we found the empty shelves, I sat in the hotel bathroom for 20 minutes before I could get dressed. It was not rage I was managing. It was something more specific than rage. It was the recognition that the people who were supposed to protect what belonged to your child had looked at 4 years of his meticulous work and decided it was inventory. That they had appraised it, scheduled a pickup, accepted a wire transfer, and then built a gaming room for children who were not him. And that in the weeks since, my mother had called me twice and talked about the weather. I sat with that for 20 minutes. Then, I got dressed. There was work to do. On day 5, I called my mother. I asked her directly about the collection. She said it was getting damaged. The humidity in that storage room was never right. We had talked about this. We found a school nearby that could use it. We donated it. Her voice did not waver. The cadence of someone who has rehearsed a version of reality and inhabited it long enough that it no longer requires effort. I said, "Which school?" She paused, just briefly. "One of the ones near the church," she said. I said nothing. I thanked her and hung up. Then I pulled the auction house lot listing and read the description again. Mixed condition. Reader copies and reprints. No first editions. No signed material. No key issues listed. A lot that sold for $92,000 described as general material with no distinguishing features. I forwarded the listing to Simone. She called back within the hour. She said, "This lot description does not match what the notebook documents. If this collection contained what the catalog shows, this lot should have listed key issues, signed material, and graded copies. Either your parents misdescribed the lot to the auction house, or the lot was not what it appeared to be. Both create problems for them." I need to know which one it is before we proceed. I told her I had a question I needed to ask Darius first. We met Vince for dinner that evening, and I took Darius outside after we ate. We sat on the front steps of the restaurant, and I told him what Simone had said about the lot description. I asked him directly, was everything on those shelves what it appeared to be? He looked down the street for a moment. Then he said, I noticed things had been moved around during spring break, 8 months ago. Nothing was missing, but the positioning was different from where I had placed things. I did not say anything. I came back in June, and there were fewer issues on the top shelf, 3 fewer than should have been there. That is when I decided. I asked him what he decided. He said, I spent $210 on reader copies and replacement reprints online over about 4 months. I did it gradually, a few issues at a time on each visit, swapping them into the positions where the originals had been. I took the originals out in my bag. They are in a fireproof lockbox at Kwame's house. His parents know it is there, and they know it is mine. I have the only key. I want to be clear about what I understood in that moment, sitting on restaurant steps in the dark. I have worked in financial analysis for 12 years. Asset protection, documentation, structured recovery. I understand how these things work. I have helped organizations larger than most people will ever touch reconstruct value that was improperly moved. And my 16-year-old son, without asking for help, without telling me, had anticipated a financial betrayal by adults, 3 times his age, sourced replacement material at a cost of $210, executed a quiet swap across multiple visits without detection, maintained a professional-grade catalog of the originals, and secured the actual assets in an off-site location with independent third-party custodians. He had been ahead of all of us by 8 months. I did not say all of that. I sat there and looked at the parking lot for a moment, and then I said, okay, let us go see Frank tomorrow. Frank Espinoza owns Lone Star Comics in Houston. He has been in the business 30 years, and he has the kind of eye that comes from 30 years of handling material and knowing immediately what is real and what is not. I called him first thing the next morning. We drove to Kwame's house to retrieve the lockbox and then to Frank's shop. Frank spent 2 hours going through the originals against the notebook. He checked condition, verified issue numbers, cross-referenced signed copies against known authenticated signatures for the relevant artists. When he looked up, he said, this catalog is consistent with professional grading methodology. I would accept this documentation in any valuation context. Replacement value on this collection at current market is $94,200. He looked at Darius. He said, you kept this log yourself? Darius said yes. Frank looked at the notebook for another moment. He did not say anything else. He did not need to. Simone filed the demand letter 3 days later, addressed to Bernard and Claudette Okafor at their Germantown address. Conversion of a minor's property. Documented replacement value, $94,200. Attorney's fees, a 30-day response window. She called me after it was confirmed delivered. She said, your father received the letter. He did not call you. He called his own attorney within the hour. That response tells you everything you need to know about his state of mind. In the days between the demand letter and Thanksgiving, my mother called me twice. She asked about the Houston weather. She asked how work was going. She sent Camille a pie recipe. She mentioned nothing about the collection, nothing about the letter, nothing about the storage room. She was warm in the way she had always been warm at a distance, which I now understood was not warmth, but maintenance. She had been performing normalcy at me my entire life, and I had occasionally mistaken the performance for the real thing. We went back to Memphis for Thanksgiving, because Simone advised being there when the structure collapsed was better than hearing about it secondhand. Camille agreed without my having to explain the reasoning. She packed for 4 days, and she did not ask me to justify the decision. Terrell and Gwen arrived before us. My brother shook my hand at the door. He held eye contact for less than 2 seconds and then looked at something over my shoulder. He knew something was coming. He did not know the specific shape of it. Gwen smiled at Camille with the careful warmth of someone who is working hard to maintain a surface she is not certain about. We sat down to the table. My father had both hands around his glass from the moment he took his seat. He talked about the yard repairs he was planning for spring. He talked about the neighbor's new fence. He asked Darius a single question about school, and then he did not ask anything else. He did not look at Darius directly for the first 40 minutes of the meal. My mother served with her usual efficiency. She moved through the room the way she always moved through family gatherings, which is to say, as the person who controls the... She had been controlling the pace of every gathering in that house for 30 years, and she did not see any reason this one would be different. Somewhere between the main course and when the pie would have been served, Darius reached into his bag, which he had brought to the table without explanation, and set the green spiral notebook on the surface in front of him. Open, page 1 facing the center of the table. He did not say what it was. He did not explain the columns or the entries. He just placed it and sat back. My mother glanced at it. Her hand was moving toward her glass. She stopped mid-reach. Darius said, "Grandma, those comics you sold." My mother picked up her glass. He said they were already gone. The ones on those shelves were reader copies and reprints I placed there myself. I moved the originals last April. They are at a shop in Houston right now, fully cataloged and authenticated by a dealer with 30 years of experience. Replacement value is $94,200. The notebook in front of you documents every issue. It goes back 4 years. My mother set her glass down at counter height. She held it there. She did not complete the motion of placing it on the table. She held it 11 inches above the surface for several seconds, and her eyes did not leave Darius. Gwen said quietly, "What does that mean?" My mother said, "Those were just copies." Her voice was steady. Her eyes were doing something different from her voice. Terrell set his fork down. I did not speak. My mother said, "You always raised him to think those things were his. That has always been the problem with the way you did this. We managed that collection for years. Storage cost something. We were owed something for the space and the time. You made him think everything he touched belonged to him entirely, and we simply corrected that understanding." She said it with the cadence of a person explaining a reasonable position. She had developed this internal logic across the months since the sale, and she had lived inside it until it felt true. In her version of events, the collection had been housed in her home and was therefore part of a shared family arrangement. Moving it had been a correction of an informal understanding, not a crime. The fact that it belonged to a 16-year-old who had documented every issue over 4 years of careful work was not something her version accommodated. Her version did not have room for the possibility that a child's property was his property regardless of where it was stored. My father looked at her when Darius finished his sentence. Not at Darius, not at me, at Claudette. He looked at her for 3 seconds, and then he looked back at his plate. That was the full extent of his participation in what happened next. It was the look of a man who had known this moment was coming and had decided long before it arrived that whatever broke in it was going to be hers to manage. He had made that choice, and he was sitting quietly inside it. Gwen said, "Terrell, did you know it was Darius's collection?" My brother said, "I knew it was a family asset sale. I did not ask what the asset was." That was accurate as far as it went. He had received a wire transfer described in family terms, and he had spent it on lumber and screens and a studio portrait session and a mini fridge, and he had not asked the source because he had decided not to. That decision, the one he made months ago at whatever point he received the money, would cost him $22,000 under the civil settlement terms. It is the most expensive thing he has ever not asked about. I said to my mother, "Simone Weatherly will be in touch about next steps." That was every word I said at that table. We did not stay for pie. We drove to the hotel, and Camille poured 2 glasses of water, and we sat at the small table by the window for a while, without talking. Outside, the Memphis night was ordinary. Traffic, a gas station sign, Nothing that matched what had just happened. I want to say something here before I finish this, because people who hear these stories often assume the person who handled it calmly was never affected by it. That I had this managed before it started, and the only feeling was something like satisfaction when it closed. That is not true. There were mornings during those 22 days when I sat with coffee and felt something I could not fully name. A specific grief about what my parents had decided my son's work was worth to them, about the fact that they had looked at 4 years of documentation and called it a storage problem. I was not fine the way I appeared to be fine. I did the work because the work needed doing, and because my son had already done more of it than I had known. But there were mornings. If you are still here, the rest matters. Stay. Terrell called me 2 days after Thanksgiving. He said he had not known it was Darius's collection specifically, that he had received a wire transfer from our parents and been told it was a family asset that had been liquidated, that he had spent the money building the gaming room because his kids wanted one and the money was there, and he had not asked where it originated. I do not know how much of that is fully accurate. I know it is the version he chose to live with. There is a difference. Gwen called Camille separately. She was not asking for anything. She said she had not known the source of the money, and that Terrell had not told her the details, because he had not sought the details himself. She said, "I want you to know, I was not part of this." Camille told me afterward that she believed her. I trust Camille's read on people. The settlement took 6 weeks to negotiate. My parents liquidated a savings bond, $31,000, paid as immediate partial restitution. Terrell agreed to repay $22,000 over 18 months under the civil agreement. The auction house matter was handled as a separate procedural complaint related to lot misrepresentation. It settled without significant complication because the auction house had no interest in prolonged legal exposure for a listing error they had not originated. Simone handled all of it. I was not in the room for most of the conversations. I did not need to be. On the day the final settlement terms were signed, Simone called me. She said, the lot description was the case. They filed it themselves. We did not have to prove anything beyond what they had already documented. Your son's records handled the rest. I said, I know. She said he kept good records. I said yes, he did. It is 14 months since that Thanksgiving. Darius is a junior. He still goes to Lone Star on Saturdays. Frank Espinoza lets him use a corner of the back room for the collection, which now lives there in proper climate-controlled storage. They have developed something that I would describe as a working friendship, which I think is mostly Frank enjoying access to someone who knows what he is talking about. Darius started a spreadsheet to track current market values across his holdings. He updates it on the 1st of every month. The settlement money sits in a custodial brokerage account I opened in his name. First deposit, after legal fees, $47,000. I sat with him the afternoon I set it up, and I told him the parameters and the options, and I asked him what he wanted to do. He asked one clarifying question about index fund exposure and tax treatment. Then he told me the allocation he wanted. I executed it. We did not discuss it again. Camille landed a mid-sized gallery as a new client in the spring. She has been working with them 4 months, and it is the best creative relationship she has had in years, the kind where the work is actually good, and the people respect what she brings to it. Our life in Houston is the same as it was before all of this. Quieter in one specific way, there is nothing to manage at the holidays. No calibration required before we walk into a room. No performance of normalcy for people who are performing it back at us. That absence is worth more than I expected it to be. My parents did not come to Houston for Christmas. They sent a card. The envelope was handwritten in my mother's hand. The card inside was a standard stock image of a winter wreath with a pre-printed seasonal greeting. There was a small area at the bottom where people write personal notes. They had not written anything in it, just their printed names from the card manufacturer, in blue ink. They had not even opened the card to add something. Bernard has not spoken to Terrell's wife since the settlement. They are still married, my parents, still in Germantown. I assume the floors still look good. The gaming room is presumably still there. I have not been back to see. My mother has not called Darius on the separate line he set up for family contacts. He has not responded to it in 14 months. He has not turned the number off. He has not explained why he keeps it active. I have not asked. 3 months ago, I drove him to Lone Star on a Saturday morning and waited in the car while he went inside. He came out 40 minutes later with a bagged issue under his arm and got into the passenger seat without saying much about what it was. We drove home. He put it in his room and came back downstairs, and we watched a game and ordered food, and that was the afternoon. Ordinary in every way. Exactly what it should have been. That is what the other side of this looks like. Not a dramatic moment. Not something you could point to and say, that is where things got better. Just an afternoon with your son, where nothing is wrong and nothing needs managing, and you realize the weight you were carrying for a long time is simply not there anymore. What my mother believed, and I think she believed it with the full weight of someone who has been the manager of her family's story for decades, is that she had corrected something, that whatever was stored in her house was hers to administer. She did not update her model of Darius. She had a fixed image of who he was at 9 years old, and she acted from that image. And it did not occur to her that he had been watching her longer than she realized, and had drawn his own conclusions about how trustworthy she was. He was 16. He had figured it out before I did. He handled it before I knew it needed handling. He kept the records, moved the originals, secured the location, said nothing, and waited. If you are in a situation where something you built carefully is being treated like it belongs to someone else, it belongs to you. Document it. Protect it if you have to do it quietly. Let the record be the thing that speaks when the moment comes.